Hello, this is Todd Luck, and I want to talk to you about an era of Tarzan comics that was short but extremely interesting, one that was bold and daring and innovative, and one that dared to ask the question of what Tarzan would be like in modern day times, and an era that apparently a lot of people don't know about. And what I'm talking about is Malibu Comics Tarzan. This was back in the 90s. The reason I'm doing this video is that when I was researching Tarzan comics on Wikipedia, it actually didn't acknowledge Malibu put out a line of Tarzan comics. It just thought they did one single miniseries. And then I saw a Comics Alliance article on the history of Tarzan in comics, and it literally didn't even acknowledge Malibu Comics Tarzan even existed. It said that between Marvel and Dark Horse, no Tarzan comics were produced. And I gotta tell you, yeah, they do exist. So let's talk about them. And so let's list the different series that were produced. And yes, Wikipedia did get correct that Tarzan the Warrior did exist. This is the flip cover on the back by Simon Beasley, which I love to death. And this is the main cover. So this was Malibu Comics' first Tarzan comics. It was a 5-issue miniseries, and it had covers by Mark Hempel. And so the artwork on the inside is done by Neil Vokes. The story is by Mark Wheatley, who's probably best known for Black Hood by Impact Comics, and his creator-owned series is Mars and Radical Dreamer. The series begins in America and has Tarzan running across some aliens and discovering that the lost cities he encountered in the novels were through dimensional portals. They existed in, kind of these other dimensions. And so Tarzan ends up going through dimensional portals and discovering, lost worlds and things like that. They kind of really evoke that feeling back in the novels when he would discover all these lost civilizations. And of course, the story ends in Africa like all of these comics do. So after that, they put out a miniseries called Love Lies in the Lost City, and this is a 3-issue miniseries where Tarzan and Jane both return to the lost city of Opar separately. And Jane is on a mission to sneak into Opar to save someone, and I call it Metal Gear Jane. There's a lot of stealth there. It's pretty cool. I'm not going to try to slaughter the name of the artist on the interior, but here's a sampling of their art. And as a bonus, the first issue has adaptations of Burroughs stories written by Matt Wagner and Walt Simonson. And then after that is Tarzan the Beckoning. This is a 7-issue miniseries by Thomas Yeats. Yeats is an industry veteran, and this was his first Tarzan series. I've always considered Thomas Yeats to be the definitive modern-day comic book artist for Tarzan. And this miniseries absolutely reinforces that and is worth getting just for the art alone. The story involves Tarzan and the Wazari fighting poachers and mercenaries. It begins in America and ends in Africa and even throws in a lost city. And it really is one of the best Tarzan comic stories you can get. And so The Beckoning was actually the final Tarzan miniseries Malibu published, but it was not the last miniseries they worked on. And so Dark Horse would next get Tarzan, and the first comic they published was Tarzan Tale of Mugambi, which is drawn by Igor Kordy, and this was a project that carried over from Malibu, and it's a companion piece to a miniseries he drew called Tarzan and the Rivers of Blood. And so this was planned early on at Malibu and was supposed to be a 4-issue miniseries. It's 8 issues by the time it gets to Dark Horse. This is the last miniseries they drew. And basically Tarzan and the Wazari get in a conflict with this evil witch doctor and his tribe. And the witch doctor does something to Jane, puts her in this kind of coma-like possessed trance. And Tarzan has to go to Europe to find Sigmund Freud to use hypnosis to try to get her out of it. And of course, Freud is missing. And unfortunately, that's as far as it made it. That miniseries was never completed and was actually the last regular series of Tarzan Dark Horse published. And so these comics were actually quite controversial when they came out in the early 90s, at least according to the letter columns in the back. Um, According to one letter, Tarzan artist Bern Hogarth actually had a rant against Malibu Comics Tarzan during a Burroughs convention called the Dum Dum back then. And I couldn't find anything about it, and I'd love if someone could find an article or something that summarized what he said, or any information about this run of Tarzan, because I can't really find a whole lot. Malibu in the comics themselves never says why they stopped publishing Tarzan, so I don't know why Malibu stopped publishing Tarzan. Heck, I don't even know why Dark Horse stopped doing regular series as a Tarzan. If anyone has any information about any of that stuff, I'd super appreciate it. And so let's touch on a few things that make these comics so unique. So first of all, they're set in modern day times. This follows what Burroughs did in the novels where Tarzan and Jane discovered the secret of immortality. Tarzan and Jane are very different people. They have very different outlooks on life, but they are fiercely devoted to each other and absolutely in love, which is how real marriages work. Jane is a tough, capable woman. She's not an action hero, but she has developed survival skills that can take care of herself and others. She's a very active part of most of the stories, and Malibu Jane is my absolute favorite portrayal of this character. Plus, she gets to rock an early 90s perm in The Beckoning, which is pretty awesome. These are indie comics, so there's a lot more skin and blood shown in these comics than you've seen in previous Tarzan comics. Instead of one creator or creative team dominating the books, they have a different creative team every book with a different vision of Tarzan every miniseries. And I also got to point out what they did with the Burroughs doodad. So the Burroughs doodad is this little symbol you'll often see on Burroughs comics or novels. So this has become kind of synonymous with who Edgar Rice Burroughs is. And so Tarzan has a scar that he got when he was younger from a horrific injury in combat, and it will show up whenever he's angry. And so what they did with the scar is they turned it into the Burroughs doodad, which is so dang clever. I love this to death. So when Dark Horse ended up getting Tarzan just a few years later, they did keep the series of mini-series kind of concept that Malibu did, but they went back and started doing the period piece sort of stories again, where they were always set in the early 20th century. However, Malibu Tarzan did get kind of touched on here and there, and so one place that kind of followed up on it was Mark Wheatley's work. This is Forbidden Knowledge. This is kind of a follow-up to his Radical Dreamer series. It's kind of an epilogue, and in it, a unlicensed version of the Tarzan family appears, and it's sort of an interesting kind of alternate take on what could happen to Tarzan in the far, far future, if him and his family continued to try to be immortal. And then Thomas Yeats would return to the idea of the immortal Tarzan, this time in an environmentally ravaged future in the Once and Future Tarzan. This originally ran as chapters in Dark Horse Presents and is collected in this one-shot, and this one-shot is the last comic devoted just to Tarzan with his name on it ever published. And so, yeah, it does bum me out we haven't gotten Tarzan comics in a long time. I mean, we have not had a series or mini-series that was officially licensed and devoted to the character in over 20 years at this point. But it just means that the older stuff is that much more meaningful. And I think Malibu fits in a very fine tradition of Tarzan comics, from the great stuff Dark Horse put out to Joe Kubert and Roy Thomas and Russ Manning and all those guys. And, none of those eras were perfect. Neither was Malibu's. It had its issues, and I'll kind of get into that and give you my opinions of each of Malibu's individual miniseries when I do reviews of those. they're not that expensive to pick up, which is good because most of them are not collected, but you should be able to find the individual issues on eBay. However, there is one collection I do recommend picking it up, and that is Tarzan the Beckoning. They went back and they recolored it and they fixed mistakes like the third issue. They printed the pages completely out of order. So this is the definitive way to experience the Beckoning, and I highly, highly recommend this trade. So like and subscribe for more videos, and until next time, see ya.